Good morning, everyone. Are we ready to go? I'd like to thank everyone who's here in person as well as online for joining us today for the release of the Phase 2 Lahaina Fire Incident Analysis Report. To start off, Attorney General Anne Lopez will provide an overview and summary of the purpose of this independent analysis conducted by the Fire Safety Research Institute. We will then welcome up Dr. Steve Kerber, Vice President and Executive Director of the Fire Safety Research Institute, and Derek Alconis, FSRI's Research Program Manager. They will explain the data and findings of the Phase 2 analysis. After that, we'll welcome up Kira Ka'ahane. She is a Deputy Attorney General assigned as the lead attorney coordinating this investigation and analysis. Following Kira's remarks, we will go into a reporter Q&A. In order to allow each media outlet a chance to ask questions, we will take one question from each agency in the first round. After everyone has had a chance to ask something, if there's enough time, we may open it up to additional questions. You can let me know that you have a question by flagging me, and we will have a microphone that we will use for you so that everyone online can hear what you have to say. For reporters online who wish to ask questions, please text them to me at the cell number you received earlier, and I will do my best to insert your question into the mix. Please include your name and media outlet you are with. So with that said, I would like to welcome up Attorney General Anne Lopez.
Quick question. When is your where are you going to stop? So we don't get planning questions. When are you going to stop?
As soon as we're done with questions. So an hour.
11.
Yes.
Thank you.
11 o'clock is the deadline.
Good morning, and thank you for attending our news conference in person and online. I know that Friday isn't the optimal day to release a report, but at the end of the day, I decided it was more important that we get the report out to the public now instead of waiting for a more convenient date. As I did with the Phase 1 report, I want to ask all media to be cognizant of the fact that this report describes in detail with images the events of the deadliest fire in Hawaii and North American history in the last 100 years. The 17,000 or over 17,000 resilient and strong individuals who survived that day are going to be reading and seeing what you're writing. I urge you to be thoughtful about the impact of your stories on those who are still struggling with these events. Briefly, let me recap why or how we got here today. On August 10th, 2023, the governor and I met, and we were asking the same question that everybody was asking. How could something like this happen? He and I concluded that good governance demanded that we do an investigation into the facts to answer that question and more. At that time, he directed me to complete an investigation into the facts surrounding the wildfire, the facts as to how they unfolded with the wildfire, and what Hawaii needs to do to be prepared to move forward in the future. I engaged FSRI to complete an objective, independent review of the facts of the wildfire, to complete a science, evidence-based analysis of the reactions and the actions of state and county agencies, and to provide evidence-based best practices that county and state government can employ going forward to ensure a safe and resilient Hawaii. To be clear, this report is not to cast blame. It's not to point fingers. In fact, you'll hear from FSRI that this report makes it clear that no one event, person, or action caused the result or the outcomes of this fire. I feel very strongly about the idea that distrust in government can only be lessened through truth, transparency, and a willingness to learn from the past. I believe that this report provides public officials and public employees the first steps on that path. Now, let me introduce Dr. Steve Kerber, who will take you through the events of their report.
Thank you very much, Attorney General Lopez. The Fire Safety Research Institute is humbled to be leading this important analysis of the Lahaina fire and to be to the point where we can share the Phase 2 analysis and report with the people of Hawaii and beyond. Before I get into details, I would like to share a little bit more about our organization. UL Research Institutes is a nonprofit safety science research organization that's been working for a safer world for over 130 years. The Fire Safety Research Institute is one of 5 research institutes, and we're dedicated to addressing the world's unresolved fire safety risks and emerging dangers. We conduct research in the areas of firefighter health and safety, battery fire safety, fire dynamics and materials, computational fire modeling, and wildland-urban interface fires. As we conduct our research, we're commonly pulled into investigations and analyses because we believe it's so important to be able to learn from important incidents like this so we can work to prevent future tragedy. Attorney General Lopez made the objective of our analysis very, very clear. We were to conduct a comprehensive, independent analysis addressing the policies and performance of state and county employees in preparing for and responding to the Maui wildfires. Since the release of the comprehensive timeline in April, our team has been systematically analyzing the relevant background information, the weather, the fuel, the infrastructure conditions, the communication, the incident management, fire suppression, and evacuation efforts, along with the details of the built environment. As you can see here, it was about speed and transparency, like the Attorney General said. We wanted to be able to share the results as quickly as possible, so we scoped this analysis in 3 separate phases. The focus of Phase 1, the Lahaina Fire Comprehensive Report and Timeline, was to identify the facts, and that was released in April. The Phase 2 report, the Lahaina Fire Incident Analysis Report, is the scientific analysis with recommendations that can be implemented quickly, and is the reason we're here today. Phase 3 will focus on the systemic recommendations for the future. Collectively, we're trying to answer that question, how do we keep this from happening again? And as a reminder, this analysis does not include an investigation of the origin and cause of the fire. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ATF, is conducting that investigation in cooperation with Maui County. As we went about our work, we leveraged the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy to provide a reference point for our analysis. The cohesive strategy is a widely accepted integrated fire management approach that facilitates a comprehensive understanding of this incident's multifaceted causes and impacts. This graphic represents 3 tenets and their overarching goals: resilient landscapes, fire-adapted communities, and safe, effective, risk-based emergency response. Each of these goals and subsequent actions taken to address them is inextricably intertwined, and the result in a positive advancement of the other 2 goals. Within the context of the cohesive strategy, we used a systems analysis methodology to assess the complex intersection of the environmental conditions, established policies and procedures, organizational structures, and accepted norms and perceptions. This analysis ultimately yielded 84 unique findings in specific areas that impacted pre-event conditions and activities as well as incident operations. These findings were taken to develop 140 recommendations for improving the conditions specified within each finding to drive meaningful change. And I think it's incredibly important to say again, this report concludes the devastation caused by the Lahaina fire cannot be connected to one specific organization, individual, action, or event. The conditions that made this tragedy possible were years in the making. And in order to get to more details of the report, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Derek Alconis.
Good afternoon. I want to first talk about the data collection effort and how we treated the data that was provided to us, and the importance of that data and really understanding what we had and being able to analyze it point by point. We treated it with reverence. We understand that firefighters, police officers, emergency management personnel offered their recollections of what happened, their experiences, emotional sharing of information. And we took this information, analyzed it against existing policies, standards, norms, in order to identify findings and recommendations what we could use to move forward. But the events of August 8th underscore the importance of addressing the well-documented fire risks that exist in the state of Hawaii. The wildfire prevention, preparedness, and operational measures in place that day faced significant, if not sometimes unprecedented, challenges as the threat escalated. This situation highlights opportunities to bolster resources and refine implementation strategies to better align with response capabilities and the risks that exist here in the state of Hawaii and also in the county of Maui. In the report, you'll find it leads off with information related to the perception of wildland risk or wildfire risk in the state and analyzing what has been done to mitigate it. As indicated by the images on the slide on the left, wildfire risk was well documented in the state and in the county of Maui during the past 12 plus years. However, there were misconceptions about these risks. This may have been born from the lack of standardized and consistent wildfire data collection and report submissions to federal organizations, which may have contributed to a lack of federal funding and state underinvestment in wildfire prevention and mitigation policies, public education, and organizational structure. The perception of wildfire risk may have also contributed to a lack of understanding of severe weather inhibiting evacuation and preventing residents from taking action to get out of the way of the fire. Complicating evacuations was the lack of cell service and the inability to receive critically important public information that would lead to understanding what was going on and where to go for safety. Infrastructure also played a role in this fire. And it consists of community planning and what existed in the past, in the plantation era in the early 20th century, in a community that was transitioning or progressing to a more populated area where you had single-family homes becoming multi-generational homes, where you had very small structures expanding into very large structures to accommodate the multi-generational families that existed in the area at the time of the fire. Community planning struggled to keep up. Codes and standards existed, but in the report you'll find how they played an important role, as well as the transportation arteries that cut through Lahaina and provided ways of egress at times, but due to the failure of infrastructure, and as we know from the first report, 29 utility poles fell, and the electrical lines overhead and communication lines, many of those fell to the ground, blocking important egress routes in forcing folks to use the plantation-era roads that cut through the vegetation surrounding the Lahaina area. Now, I included vegetation management within this infrastructure slide, but it really isn't. But I wanted to identify the importance of this, where vegetation management does play a large role. It is what first ignited and got the fire moving. And this is an important topic to move forward. Creating policies, processes, and organizational structure to address vegetation management is extremely important in this state. The report moves through not only the prevention and preparedness piece that we just talked about, but also it gets into the details of incident management and the coordination of resources that took place that day, what they did. And that starts with the preparedness of extreme events and how both the public was prepared or not, how emergency responders were prepared or not. And this is an important element to being prepared for the next one. As we learned from many areas in the mainland, through experience with these type of events, things need to change. And preparedness is where it starts. The unified command structure and the importance of operating at the incident scene, in this case of Lahaina, and having both the fire department and the police department co-located at an incident command post, alongside with Hawaiian Electric, with the water company, with the road department, to ensure the roads are maintained and stay open, and those lock gates stay open. Animal control, to take care of the animals in the area. All of those things are critically important at a unified incident command post. And the report really emphasizes the importance of that. There's a section on communications, which we've divided into 3 different areas. The operations communications, which entail what's going on at the command post and how those leaders are communicating with the personnel performing the task of evacuating folks, rescuing folks, suppressing the fire, handling traffic control, handling utilities, all of those things. Critically important that those operational communications are ongoing. That was challenged during this event because of the infrastructure challenges with the cell signals and the compromised communication paths. Even though the radios were working fine, but oftentimes even emergency responders use texting to go back and forth, and that was challenged on that day. The communications that happened at the EOC and the importance of informing the EOC of these different events. Of course, there was 4 fires that day. It wasn't only the Lahaina fire. We understand that. And that's emphasized in how that played and impacted this particular event in Lahaina. But the EOC was challenged with managing the information coming in from the field to process what was needed. And the details of that are included in this report, as well as the information that was going out to the public and how the public was either informed or not, which is a critical component moving forward of how do you create resilient forms of communication besides using a cell signal. There needs to be something more, especially in an event like this. We have a whole section devoted to evacuations and what was done in that time frame, and the importance of understanding of how to get in and out of an area like that, which you have roughly 13,000 people at the time, and many of which were challenged with getting out of the area because of blocked roadways. And there's stories in there about the police officers opening gates, breaking the locking mechanisms to get access to the dirt road, and then driving on dirt roads, getting behind houses, going through another gate to finally get people to safety. Those details are included in this report, and how you move from that. And then, of course, the fire suppression efforts. What happened between the AM and the PM fire in Lahaina? That's detailed in this report. And the complexities of that, and the history of perhaps how the firefighters perceived the particular conditions that day, and how their previous experiences may have impacted the way they went about their business that day. It also is a story about every single firefighter was driven out of their position and overrun by fire, meaning they were incapable of standing their ground and suppressing the fire. They had to retreat, every single one of them. And the loss of equipment, that's detailed as well. The final section of the report reviews the built environment and the structure damage and fire spread analysis, and it gets into the facts about, well, what did the area consist of building construction-wise at the time of the fire? And the building and fire codes that existed. And what did structural density role play in the progression of the fire and the speed at which it overtook some of the communities? And the adjacent vegetation that was growing at times right into folks' garage, and in the role that that played. The vehicles in the roadways, the narrow roads, which normally would provide some form of fire break. And in this case, when you have the narrow roads that are lined with thousands of cars, this was not a fire break. It was another way for the fire to advance itself by lighting a vehicle on fire and another one and a structure. One structure led to 10, led to 100, led to 1,000. Ultimately, we had over 2,000 structures that were lost. The details of that are included in this report, and we will learn why some structures survived and some did not, and what are those resilient factors that contributed to some structures being saved. And it's a story also about fire suppression and defensive actions of both the firefighters and the citizens. The residents played a role in times, and as we reviewed the data, we found that there were experiences where the firefighters and the residents made a significant difference, and it's the reason why some of the structures were saved. Those stories are told. Finally, all of this, as promised by Attorney General Lopez, is going to be provided to the public, meaning not only the report, but also the data that we've received through Maui County, through the state, and through organizations within the federal government. This information includes body camera footage from the police, 911 dispatch audio files, vehicle location data for both the police and the fire department, and our damage assessment assets, our videos and images. We were on site at the end of August. We stayed until into November, walking most every property, 360 views, overhead views, to make sure that we documented how the fire progressed through the community so we can understand how the built environment performed against such challenging conditions. The interviews with state and county officials, means the firefighters, the police officers, and all of those folks in MEMA, HIEMA, those interviews and the audio files are included in that. And I will say, there's a certain level of reverence that we should all have for that testimony. that they're offering everybody. Normally that doesn't happen. The most significant incident in their lives. Many of them have been criticized in the news media. But nonetheless, they told their story honestly. And I think we need to respect that. We need to honor that as we review this information. It's important that we understand where they're coming from and walk in their shoes for a moment. As we said, this information amounts to about 850 gigabytes. Finally, the 518-page report is a story of extreme weather in unmanaged vegetation, coupled with limited wildfire prevention and preparedness, and firefighters and police officers, emergency management, all of them doing the best they could. But they were overwhelmed. And it's really a story of moving forward, identifying where actions can occur, what could be done today, tomorrow, next year, 3 years, 5 years, long-term plan. There's a lot of work to be done. And that needs to happen very soon. Next, I'd like to invite up Deputy Attorney General Kira Kahahane, who has been instrumental in securing much of the assets that we've requested from Maui County. And those have been requested through subpoena over this last year, and we appreciate her effort and also her insight into Lahaina, being raised there, understanding the culture, the importance of that community. So, Kira.
Thank you, Mr. Alconis. E ho'ala hou iana, a oia kue kanani. It shall rise anew, with yet more magnificence. That line is from a kaniko, a chant of lamentation, that was originally written more than 160 years ago, after a fire destroyed what was then known as the Lahaina Luna Seminary. The seminary was rebuilt, and it now stands proudly as Lahaina Luna High School, a testament to Lahaina's enduring strength and perseverance. I grew up in Lahaina, and like many in that community, I lost family on August 8th. What I experienced that day, and in the months afterward, is a tiny fraction of what thousands of people went through and are still going through. I want to take a moment to recognize all of those who were affected by the fire, those who lost friends, family, and homes. Through my involvement in this investigation, I tried to humbly serve as a voice for you, the people of Lahaina. As described in this report, no single factor or set of factors was directly responsible for the devastation of the August 8th fire. Rather, the conditions that existed on August 8th were the result of a confluence of factors and had been building for decades. The same conditions are present in other communities across Hawaii. As we move forward, people from many areas of expertise across our communities and our government must work together to change how we collectively approach fire prevention. The report released today contains more than 100 discrete recommendations on topics as diverse as emergency management and response, building codes, infrastructure, and land management. These recommendations are primarily directed towards our state, county, and federal governments, but everyone can act on something in this report. Nowhere are these recommendations more applicable or their implementation more necessary than in my very own hometown. Through cooperation, we can honor Lahaina and build a safer future for its people. Thank you. Mahalo no ka ho'olohe ana mai.
Thank you, Deputy Kahahane. You've been a superb lawyer throughout this whole process. And I know it hasn't been easy. So we also honor you and the effort that you've given. As just so eloquently stated, we all, as individuals and communities, play a role in how we move forward, how we make our homes and communities a safer place. This Phase 2 report provides the science, evidence-based information and steps government needs to learn from its mistakes, to move forward to ensure a safer Hawaii. From the commencement of this investigation, the governor and I have been committed to transparency. What we've done today is at 10 o'clock, as Mr. Alconis stated, 850 gigabytes of data are now available on the website of the Department of the Attorney General. It includes the documents, audio, visual that we receive from federal, state, and county agencies, as well as the interviews with the public employees at both the state and county level, as well as elected officials. It includes FSRI's own data compilations. With respect to my commitment to transparency, I have only redacted the personal identifying information of residents or individuals present. I have only redacted images of the deceased. With that, we're ready to take your questions.
Wait for the microphone. And Daryl, you can be first. Who else? Thomas. Next, and Jen. And I'll pull
I think, Mr. Alconis, in the report you say that there was a lack of perception of the risk, not a significant perception of the risk prior to this, that indeed preparedness was not where it should have been given what level of risk there was. My question is, what lessons should have been learned in 2018 from the first fire in Lahaina that destroyed all those structures? Same officials were involved in that incident as were in place when Lahaina burned. So what lessons should have been learned and applied before this fire that might have been learned from that 2018 fire?
So the 2018 fire, I know we have one report that has been released, and that was from MEMA. And that was a preliminary report, wasn't finalized, but we all saw it. We have not seen a report from the police department or the fire department for the 2018 fire. We are going to learn more about that fire. We have a interview with the incident commander later next week. And so we hope to learn more details. So I can't really comment on what can be learned because we don't know enough about that fire. But we'll know more by next week.
Can I just follow up very briefly? So,
We're going to go to other questions, and then if we have time.
next one's Thomas. Donna, Thomas. He's the one in the back.
Who exactly was the incident commander for the 2018 Lahaina fire?
It's Amos Lonokailua Hewitt.
Okay, the next one was
Just there.
Jennifer.
Thanks. Oh, sorry. A question for Kira and maybe the Attorney General. Like you said, a lot of what is described about the infrastructure and, how Lahaina, housed a lot of multi-generational families, the narrow roads with cars parked there because there's so many people living in one property. That describes a lot of Hawaii. And, what could you say about how these recommendations apply to the rest of the state and in changing maybe sort of that apathy in terms of red flag warnings and wildfire risks? And also for Kira, where you went grad.
I'm a graduate of the Kamehameha School's Maui campus. Go Warriors. Would you like to
Do you
answer?
have any comments about the
Sure.
letter?
As you've very correctly identified, these conditions exist across the state of Hawaii. And in addition to an approach from the government, we also need the involvement of every single member of the community to really buy into fire preparedness and prevention, to take red flag warnings and other aspects of fire preparedness seriously.
Changing attitudes isn't easy. One of the things I learned in this report is that unlike other places on the mainland, a red flag day is almost like a normal day in Hawaii. And we can't necessarily tell the difference from one day to the other. So part of what we need to do, and it's included in the findings and the recommendations, is all of our communities need to learn that information. We need to understand what a red flag warning means. I didn't until a year ago. We need to understand what it means when we park our cars on both sides of the street and in front of fire hydrants. We need to understand what it means when we keep all of our stuff, and we all have it, in our garages, on the side of our house, and next to our neighbor's side of their house. And that kind of complacency that Kira just talked about, we have to bring an urgency to the fact that we have a lot to learn. And with that, consistent with why we're doing this investigation, government has to learn. We need to look at legislation for the coming session that we can use so that we can really implement these recommendations. Some may cost money, some won't, but we need to move. And I am confident after my conversations with the governor and with the legislature that they're ready to meet that urgency with legislation that will help us.
So you kind of answered my question, but we talk about complacency, and after this is all said and done, and 10 years from now, I guess I'm wondering how, you'll have the political will to continue to, push urgency or to make people vigilant after we forget, not forget, but, after this kind of calms down.
Right, and I totally understand what you mean. And one of the reasons I wanted this report completed in 1 year is because once this is no longer fresh in our mind, we're going to forget, and we can't afford to do that. One of the bills that the legislature passed last session and that the governor signed was to create the position of a state fire marshal. Right now, our fire council is made up of the 4 fire captains. It's not supported with staff. It's just the 4 fire captains on their own. The findings and recommendations in this report provide a lot of data points for the fire marshal to start being that person who reminds us of the urgency, who helps us collaborate throughout the state so that we have standardized processes for doing things. And I feel confident if the right person who can lead and be a leader, that is the person in the position that we can use to keep that urgency in our mind. Just like, I don't know how many fires we've had since August 8th. I know that about 3, maybe 2 months ago, there were 11 fires in a 10-day period on Maui and Kauai, some of which required evacuations and road closures. So even if we all start becoming more complacent, I don't think climate change is going to let us really forget about the urgency.
Hi. We don't have a cause or origin determined for the fire yet, but these findings don't lay blame at anyone's doorstep. How do you think, how do we, one, explain that? And we don't know, we don't have an official cause of origin, but this phase of the investigation determines that not one agency or entity is to blame. And how do you think this will impact the global settlement at all in terms of just how the judge will rule going forward?
Right. Well, I don't want to remark on how this is going to affect the global settlement. These are 2 completely separate actions that are ongoing at this time. But The issue of liability is clearly one that's out there, that is always going to be out there whenever there's any sort of an event. The governor's focus and my focus has been to decide that good governance is more important than liability or worrying about liability. Good governance means we have to act, and we have no excuse to not act with the findings and the recommendations that are in this report and those that will come in phase 3. We have an obligation to every person in Hawaii to do better and to be better and make sure our communities grow and are built better.
Hi, this is probably for Attorney General. Do you have any information about that ATF report, when it will be released? What is the relationship with this report to you? Are you working with the ATF on that report? And do you know if it'll be released publicly when it is released?
I can't answer most of those questions. I know that, I understand that the ATF report is either complete or very close to completion. It is not part of this report, although, and I think Mr. Alconas can talk about it a little bit more, I believe that they've had conversations with the ATF team who was doing the investigation.
Could we ask just Mr. Alconas, how does that work if we don't have an official determination of the cause or origin of the fire? How then does the FSR investigation address, if no one is to blame for anything, but we don't know where the fire started or how it started? How do those two realities exist at the same time?
Well, I mean, there are things that we understand about the cause and origin. I mean, we've seen a lot of news pieces on it, right? We know that the electrical infrastructure was involved. We saw that. And we know that grass was involved, and then the fire got moving into the built environment. So in terms of like the details of how that happened, how the fire got moving into the vegetation from the overhead power lines coming down during the wind event, they'll describe all of that. They'll take us through understanding the AM fire, how it started, and the PM fire, and whether or not they're related or they're independent fires. They're going to explain all of that information. We pick up the fire at the point that it hits structures. And we pick up not only the fire, but all of the events that go into that, the evacuation effort, even before that, the prevention piece, the preparedness piece, the interactions with other agencies. So our report is a comprehensive report in the way of looking at prevention and preparedness, the actions of the fire department, the police department, the emergency managers, and the emergency and other emergency responders, like the ambulance even included. U.S. Coast Guard is mentioned in phase 1 and their role. So does that answer the question?
Do you mind answering the back part of my question about what kind of conversations you're having with the ATF about information sharing?
We both, in terms of, we haven't seen the report. We know kind of where they are at in terms of gathering information, and that was a lot of information from both the fire department and Hawaiian Electric. And we didn't see the information that, all of the information that they had, and like I mentioned, we don't know how they analyzed it and what will be in the report. We only know that it's at a stage, as Attorney General Lopez mentioned, that it's near final. And so, like you, we are anxious to see it.
Just to make sure we understand that on all the interviews that were done, and you're going to be releasing the recordings, they all knew they were going to be interviewed for this study and that it was going to be publicly released, correct?
Yes, they knew that They knew we were recording it. They knew that these things were going to be used for the analysis. That was understood.
And then does the report recommend any structural changes to enhance collaboration between agencies in the future?
There are findings addressing the importance of unifying and working collaboratively together with all of the agencies. Yes.
I'm wondering, along with the 2018 incident commander that you mentioned, which other agencies or individuals maybe either resisted or you had to compel to comply with the subpoena, and why you think that was, what the reasons were?
We only subpoenaed the incident commander on this one, and we felt like we can start there. If we feel like we need more information, then we'll go that direction. But in many of these types of investigations, you kind of start with the main person, find out who the other involved individuals or organizations are, and then you go from there.
And will that subsequent conversation be made public along with all these other materials, with the incident commander?
Because the 2018 fire is included in this report, you'll see a section where you'll know the questions we're going to be asking the incident commander next week, and you'll see the preliminary information that we do have in regards to the incident, but nonetheless, it's not complete, it's not comprehensive, so it's difficult to answer your question.
But we'll eventually get the responses from that incident.
It'll be included in Phase 3.
Carol, we can go to the second round of questions. I think everyone got there, so go ahead.
I'm familiar in California where they actually have people who are the wildfire inspectors who go around and say, you cut down that tree, you cut down that tree. It's happening to my sister and brother-in-law right now. So do you think we need something that aggressive, or do you think the public should just take from all this, look around your house and do something about it?
So I'm going to answer that in two ways. We talked about limited wildfire prevention and preparedness activities going on around the state. Now, the organization that's really at the forefront of all of that is the Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization. And you'll see them mentioned several times within the report. In fact, they're the authors of many of the community wildfire protection plans, which there's over 20 of those. There's over 20 Firewise communities that use that wildfire protection plan document to guide their actions to ensure that those communities are safer from wildfire. So that's what's going on right now, which is great. Now, in California, obviously, it got to a point where they felt that they needed to regulate that more, enforce in some areas that are the very high fire hazard severity zone areas. And yeah, you have inspectors going out and performing those inspections to ensure people are maintaining defensible space around their properties. Now, it took California many years to get to that point, to enforceable law, right, and to staff it appropriately to get to that point. We're in a scale situation here, and I'm not going to answer what's going to happen, but as you drive around the community, I mean, you should be the judge. And as you see grass growing up against structures, you should think, well, maybe we need to do something about that. So I'm not in a position to make a comment of what's going to happen next, but you got to start somewhere.
The report has many recommendations for policymakers about different things that they can do with vegetation management, communication. Are there particular top-line items that, the state legislature or counties must address, like top priority from this report?
Do you want me to?
The governor has asked us, with FSRI's assistance, to sort of create a priority list of those recommendations. We have not done that yet, but the governor basically said, what are the top 10 most important recommendations that we need to be aware of?
Thomas was next, and does anyone else have a question? Who hasn't already asked the second question?
I'm just wondering if there could be some examples provided of how WUI codes might have stemmed the spread of the fire structure to structure throughout Lahaina.
So defensible space is mentioned in the WUI code, right? I mean, or ordinances passed around, many parts of the mainland. Now, and that includes the clearance around electrical infrastructure, which is mentioned in the report, something that should be addressed by the Public Utilities Commission here. If you were to look at, for example, at the California website for the Utilities Commission and CAL FIRE's information that they share regarding vegetation management and defensible space, it's all over, right? It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. You know you have a responsibility. It's very clear. Now, of course, it's difficult to look back and say, if those things were in place, would this not have happened? There's always cases where there's a little tuft of grass that maybe didn't get cleared. So it's difficult to say. Would it have been better? Absolutely. I mean, that's why everybody's doing it on the mainland. Because if you have vegetation or mineral soil which doesn't burn, then it doesn't burn. And if you have plantings that are positioned around a structure in a way that meets the guidelines for a defensible space that are well documented, it's more likely not to burn.
And just to add to that very quickly is that building codes are evolving. The science to support those building codes is going on every single day. Many more agencies and universities are tackling those important aspects that need to be understood to improve those building codes. The WUI code has gone under massive improvement, and I think there's an opportunity here to look at aspects of that and to get ahead of that code adoption by doing the right thing as opposed to waiting to fully update the building code, which we know can lag quite a bit.
Errol will have the last question, and then we'll wrap it up.
How would you describe the conduct response of Herman Ndaya, now that you've talked to him, presumably? Was his response adequate, inadequate, negligent? How would you describe it?
I think I mentioned during the Phase 1 report that we asked the question, he answered them. And I guess you'll see it for yourself, or you'll listen to it. And his actions are detailed in also his communications with his staff as he was away. I mean, the text messages are there. What was going on at the time, you can kind of cross-reference all that. But again, I mean, I think this incident is a story of prevention, preparedness, improving operational response. And it starts with that, as we see it, as you look through all of the data and get an understanding of the perception of wildfire risk in the state, I think you two you'll come to the conclusion that more needs to be done in that prevention and preparedness space first. And in the operational preparedness with firefighters and police officers and unifying and working together. And what goes on in the EOC is important, of course. I mean, they're going to provide resources for the operations, which is critically important, of course. But for this particular, what we can learn from this incident are the things that I just mentioned.
One last question.
make it quick. So I just wanted somebody to just give us the current risk for something like this happening today as we speak, because you talked about across the state we have major fire risk, but can you, somebody describe that?
So, I mean, currently, there is ongoing effort in different parts of the state, from what we understand, to manage some of the vegetation that's out there. We don't have an idea of exactly where and how much, but we do know that there's work being done in that area. And I think that's a question for the State Fire Council. I mean, the chief officers that sit on that council, to get an understanding of where we are for fire risk. And they've got their fingers on the pulse. They're responsible for each county. They know where their resources are. They're already making modifications to their operations to address these types of incidents. But in terms of preparedness and prevention and those sort of things, I think they're best to answer that question. The Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization, they got their shoulder to the wheel and they're doing all they can. That's a nonprofit organization that typically is staffed by a state organization if you're looking at mainland type operations. An operation this big where wildfire threat is very real in the state of Hawaii, I would say it constitutes, and it's even one of our findings, that it's time to staff it up, to put more effort in that area.
I would like to add to that question. I had asked, and I have the answer now. There have been over 1,500 wildfire ignitions requiring a department response since August 8th, 2023. Of those, 7 of the ignitions resulted in significant fires over 500 acres. So I think the risk is real, and it's a present danger. And climate change will only continue to make these things worse. With this in mind, I want to reiterate that this administration is committed to ensuring that we don't sit on these recommendations, that we learn from the past, and that we move forward in a collaborative manner with county agencies, with other organizations and individuals to ensure that we create a safer Hawaii. Thank you very much for being here today.
Yep, I will walk you guys on out of here.